The morning the neurosurgeon told my husband I had maybe 3 weeks before my brain gave out entirely, Craig walked back into my ICU room, took one look at my face, and smiled. Not the soft, crumbling smile of a man watching his wife die. The other kind, slow and almost private, the smile you give yourself in an empty room when something has gone exactly the way you needed it to. I could not speak. The hemorrhage had taken my words from me. They were still there, fully formed, screaming behind my teeth, but my mouth produced nothing except a thick, slurring approximation of sound that the nurses had learned to decode. My right hand lay dead at my side. The monitors above me beeped their indifferent rhythm while my husband stood at the foot of my bed and quietly, almost delicately, exhaled. He believed I was unconscious. I was not. My younger sister Amber appeared in the doorway behind him, designer carry-on rolling across the linoleum, sunglasses pushed back on her head. She had flown in from Scottsdale the moment Craig called her. I had told myself, in the terrifying fog of my first hours in this hospital, that she came because she loved me. That a brain bleed at 41 was the kind of thing that cut through years of distance and resentment and reminded people what actually mattered. I had been wrong. Craig moved to the window and lowered his voice, but the room was dead quiet except for the monitors, and his whisper carried with perfect clarity. The attending says she won't recover meaningful function. Even if she stabilizes, she'll need full-time care. Could be a year, could be the rest of her life. Amber set her bag down without looking at me. So you can file the conservatorship petition now? My attorney says within the week. Once I have conservatorship, all of it comes under my management. The ranch, the accounts, the trust her father set up, all of it. A pause. My cardiac monitor registered the acceleration of my pulse. Neither of them glanced at it. What about the Mustang? Amber said. Craig made a low sound I recognized. The sound of a man who had already decided something and just needed permission to say it out loud. I have a private collector in Houston lined up. A 67 fastback in that condition, original engine, documented restoration history. He'll pay serious money. I'm having it appraised Thursday. My right hand trembled against the mattress. I could not move it deliberately, but it trembled. The 1967 Mustang fastback Highland Green sat in the barn on our property outside Fredericksburg, Texas. My father had dragged it out of a salvage yard in Abilene when I was 14 years old, paid $300 for a rusted shell that looked like nothing except junk, and pointed at it and said, "I see potential in that." I said, "Dad, that's a tetanus shot waiting to happen." He laughed so hard he had to hold on to the truck. We spent 4 years bringing it back. Every weekend, from the fall of my freshman year of high school to the spring I graduated, we worked in the bay behind the main barn. He taught me how to rebuild a carburetor, how to read a torque spec, how to work a body hammer without leaving marks. He taught me patience. He taught me that the things worth having take longer than you want them to and cost more than you planned and are worth it anyway. He never said that directly. He didn't have to. It was in every hour we spent in that bay, in the grease on his hands, and the way he'd stop sometimes and just stand back and look at what we'd made and nod once, slowly, like he was checking something important off a list that existed only in his own mind. My father, Clyde Hartwell, had spent 30 years building the Hartwell Ranch into something real. 340 acres of cedar and live oak outside Fredericksburg. A cattle operation that ran clean. A small family trust he established the year I was sworn in as a deputy U.S. Marshal, structured specifically with my name on it and no one else's. He had watched Craig from the beginning with the quiet, unhurried skepticism of a man who had seen a certain kind of person before and knew how to wait for them to reveal themselves. 2 months before he died, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and walked me through those trust documents himself, page by page, until I understood every clause. He put the ranch, the liquid assets, and the Mustang under my sole authority. He had known, and he had prepared. Before I tell you what happened next, take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to know you're out there, because what I'm about to tell you, I need someone to hear. Don't go anywhere. Because the roots of this betrayal didn't start in that hospital room. They were planted long before Craig ever sat beside my father's deathbed and told him he would take care of me. I gripped the thin, bleach-smelling hospital blanket with my left hand and made myself breathe deliberately, the way they'd taught us at Glencoe during defensive tactics training. Slow the heart rate. Inventory your resources. Do not move until you have a plan. My resources: one working hand, a mind that was entirely intact, a cell phone on the bedside table that Craig had not thought to take, and a 64-year-old woman named Rosa Medina, who had managed my father's ranch for 26 years and who would, I knew with absolute certainty, step in front of a moving truck before she let Craig Whitmore put his name on a single acre of that property. I picked up the phone with my left hand and typed 3 words. Rosa, Come now. She was there by 7 that evening. She came in quietly, the way Rosa did everything. Canvas work jacket, the right sleeve worn through at the elbow, boots that had seen more honest work than most people's entire lives combined. She sat down in the chair beside my bed and looked at me directly and without flinching, the way she had looked at my father during his last months. Rosa Medina did not look away from difficult things. I held up my phone. They're going for conservatorship. Craig wants the ranch and the trust. I need you to call Nina Blackwood. She's in my contacts. Tell her everything. Rosa read it once, her jaw set in the thin, controlled way I had seen twice before, once when Craig tried to fire her without cause 2 years into our marriage, and once when a contractor her cousin had referred turned out to be padding invoices. She pressed her lips together and typed back, I know about the appraiser. A man came to the barn this afternoon. I told him the vehicle wasn't available. I exhaled. She typed again, I also know a doctor, retired Army. 20 years at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio. He did surgery on my husband before Hector passed. If you want, I call him first. I looked at her. Yes, I typed, both. She stood, straightened her jacket, glanced once at the door the way my father used to check the sky before a long day, assessing, not worried, just making sure she knew what she was walking into. Rest, she said, you're not done yet. The next morning, Craig arrived with a manila folder. He sat beside my bed with the careful, performed solemnity of a man doing his civic duty and presented what he called temporary management documents, a conservatorship petition and a healthcare directive that, buried on page 4, authorized him to transfer me to a residential memory care facility if 2 physicians of his choosing determined I was unlikely to recover. His physicians, his choice. I stared at the folder, then I shook my head. His face didn't fall. It tightened just slightly around the eyes. He gathered the folder and left. The second medical opinion came through Rosa's contact, Dr. Harmon, retired Army, reviewing my imaging from a VA-affiliated facility in San Antonio without once setting foot in the hospital, where Craig had already introduced himself to the floor staff as my primary caregiver. Harmon called Rosa on the evening of the 3rd day. She held her phone to my ear. His voice was the voice of a man who had delivered hard news long enough to know how to make it land without softening what needed to be said. Mrs. Hartwell, your hemorrhage has stopped active bleeding as of this morning's imaging. The prognosis you've been given, permanent severe disability, weeks to live without intervention, is based on an interpretation I do not share. With a surgical coiling procedure and proper post-operative rehabilitation, your odds of meaningful recovery are substantially better than what you've been told. Your speech deficit and your right-side motor weakness are likely temporary, but you need to authorize the surgery yourself, and soon, because if someone else takes that authority. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I closed my eyes. I will not apologize for what came next. I had spent 72 hours convincing myself I was dying, not just medically, but in every other sense, that the life I had built was already over, that Craig had won simply by waiting. The tears came fast and ugly, and I cried into a paper towel with the bathroom faucet running loud so no one in the hallway could hear, and when I was done, I looked at my own face in the mirror for a long time. I looked like someone who had been through something enormous and come out the other side, knowing something she hadn't known before. I walked back to the bed. If you have ever looked up at the ceiling of a hospital room and understood that the people who were supposed to love you were already spending what you left behind, press the like button right now. Because what I did next, I did for every person who has ever had to fight for their own life twice, once against the illness, and once against the people who were counting on the illness to win. I hit the nurse call button and asked for the patient advocate. When she arrived 40 minutes later, I had Nina Blackwood on a video call, her briefcase open on her desk at home, speaking for me in the clear, unhurried voice she had used in family court for 20 years. I was revoking Craig Whitmore's designation as my healthcare representative, effective immediately. I was authorizing the surgical procedure Dr. Harmon recommended to be coordinated through the VA in San Antonio. I was requesting that my medical records be maintained exclusively in the VA system, separate from the civilian hospital records Craig's attorney had already subpoenaed. The patient advocate blinked twice, then she picked up her forms. Craig appeared in the doorway 11 minutes later, pulled by some instinct or by a call from someone on the floor. He looked at Nina's face as my phone screen and went very still. "What is this?" he said. "This is your wife making her own decisions," Nina said pleasantly. "I'd suggest you call your attorney." I raised my left hand and pointed at the door. He left. The surgery went exactly as Dr. Harmon had predicted. I came through it with a level of clarity that surprised the attending surgeon, who had been operating under the assumption that my baseline was significantly more impaired than it actually was. Speech therapy started within 48 hours. My right hand began responding on day 3. By the time I was discharged to the ranch 11 days later, I could walk with a cane, hold a full conversation at about 70% of my normal speed, and type faster than most people half my age. Craig knew none of this. Because the VA records stayed in the VA system, and what went into the civilian hospital chart, the chart Craig's attorney had a copy of, was a discharge summary written in the conservatively worded language of a physician who had been briefed by Nina on exactly what we needed it to say. Nothing in it was false. Every word of it was careful. As far as Craig knew, I was coming home to finish dying slowly. Rosa met me at the gate in her truck, helped me inside, settled me into the downstairs bedroom. Then she stood in the doorway and said without preamble, "He's been in your father's office 3 times this week. Amber is in the guest room. She's got a realtor's name written on the notepad on the nightstand." I photographed it. She held up her phone. I looked at the photo. "Good," I said. I faked a fog for 10 days. I shuffled when Craig was watching. I let my speech run slower than it actually was, let my eyes lose focus when Amber came to sit with me, let her feed me soup as though I couldn't manage the motion myself. She talked to me in the slightly too loud voice of a woman performing patience for an invisible audience, and I watched her eyes move around the room when she thought I wasn't tracking. She was taking inventory. She had been taking inventory since the day she arrived. Rosa became my forward observer. 2 clicks on the ranch intercom meant Craig was on the phone with his attorney. 3 clicks meant Amber had a visitor. Rosa photographed every document that came through the mailbox and logged every vehicle that came up the ranch road. She found the records of the financial advisor visits, the appraisal inquiries on the barn equipment, the preliminary outreach Craig had sent to a commercial real estate firm asking them to quietly evaluate a rural Texas property. He was preparing to sell the ranch. He called a family meeting the second Friday after I came home. He brought 2 people, his estate attorney and a financial advisor I had never met. Amber sat beside him at my father's kitchen table, the table my father had built from cedar he cut off the South Ridge the year I was born, a folder, a laptop, store-bought cookies on a plate in the center of the table, a detail so falsely domestic it made me want to look away. I sat across from them in my robe, right hand resting with a slight manufactured tremor, left hand flat on the table. Craig's attorney cleared his throat. "June, we've put together a document that transfers temporary financial management authority to Craig, just while you're recovering. The ranch accounts, the operating LLC, the Hartwell Trust, just until you're back on your feet." Craig covered my left hand with his, the old gesture, the one I had believed in once. "Let me handle this," he said. "You don't need to worry about any of it right now." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "I think not." Fully clear, fully present, no slur, no hesitation. The back hallway door opened. Nina Blackwood walked in wearing her good coat, carrying the leather briefcase I recognized from the afternoon she had sat beside my father and witnessed the final draft of his trust documents. Behind her, Rosa came and stood in the kitchen entry with her arms crossed and her expression entirely neutral, the same expression she had given Craig's appraiser when she told him the car wasn't available. Nina sat down at the table without being invited, opened her briefcase with a clean double click, and set a stack of documents in front of Craig's attorney. "My name is Nina Blackwood. I've represented June Hartwell for the past 11 days, and you'll want to review these before this conversation goes any further." She had spent 11 days building a wall. She had restructured the Hartwell Family Trust as an irrevocable instrument, removing Craig Whitmore from any beneficiary status and sealing every account behind legal firewall he had no access code for. She had obtained an emergency restraining order, preventing the sale or transfer of any ranch property pending a full judicial review of Craig's financial conduct during our marriage. Because Nina's forensic accountant had found, in 11 days of document review, something Craig apparently believed no one would ever think to look for. 14 months of wire transfers, $411,000, moved in increments from our joint marital accounts into a private account Craig had opened without my knowledge. The secondary signature on that account belonged to a woman in Austin whose name I had found in Craig's phone 7 months before my hemorrhage, in a moment I had chosen at the time to explain away. I was done explaining things away. Nina walked Craig's attorney through each page. His expression changed somewhere around page 9 and did not recover. The financial advisor Craig had brought quietly closed his laptop and excused himself, and no one tried to stop him. The ranch was completely silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cattle in the south pasture. I looked at my husband across my father's table. You want to explain the transfers? I said. He didn't. Amber pushed her chair back abruptly. I don't have anything to do with. Amber, I said her name once quietly. She stopped. I have your text to the Fredericksburg realtor. Sit down. She sat down. Craig's attorney set the documents on the table and looked at his client with the expression of a man who has just realized he is in a room he should not be in. The house was silent. Get out of my father's house, I said. I want to be honest about what followed, because I think people who have been through something like this expect the ending to arrive clean and immediate. It didn't. Greedy people do not walk away gracefully from a gold mine that has just been legally sealed shut. Craig hired a team of attorneys and spent 7 months in family court arguing that the trust restructuring had been executed while I was mentally incapacitated, that a woman who had managed her own surgical care, directed her own legal strategy, and run a covert evidence operation from a downstairs bedroom had somehow not been competent to sign her name. Dr. Harmon testified. He was precise, unhurried, and devastating in the particular way that 20 years of Army medicine makes a person thorough. He produced imaging, dated cognitive assessments, blood panels, timestamped documentation of my mental function beginning from the day he first reviewed my case. He walked the court through what a subarachnoid hemorrhage of my grade actually meant, and more importantly, what it did not mean. Nina presented the wire transfers, all of them, the timeline, the account structure, the name on the secondary signature. The judge dismissed the incapacity challenge with prejudice on day 3 of trial. I sat at the defense table with my hands folded and my jacket pressed and watched Craig's attorneys try to find a crack in a wall that Nina had spent 11 days making sure had none. There were no cracks. Craig left the courthouse without looking at me. Amber had stopped attending by day 2. Her calls I did not answer. Her texts shifted over the weeks from angry to wounded to carefully recalibrated, the language of someone reassessing what they might still be able to get from a situation that had not gone the way they planned. I read them the way I used to read threatening correspondence at the Marshal's office. Calmly, for information, without letting them land. I blocked her on a Sunday morning in November, sitting on the back porch, with black coffee and the early hill country light coming gold and thin through the cedar. It didn't feel like loss. I had expected grief. What I felt instead was something quieter. The particular sensation of setting down something that had been heavy for so long you had stopped noticing the weight. 6 weeks after the trial, I called Rosa into my father's office and asked her to sit down in the leather chair across the desk. She sat the way she always sat. Straight, hands in her lap, boots flat on the floor, the posture of someone who took up exactly the space she needed and not an inch more. I slid the documents across the polished wood. A block of shares from the ranch's operating LLC transferred into her name, a permanent employment agreement paired with a pension she could activate whenever she was ready, not whenever anyone else decided for her. Full health coverage for herself and her daughter down in Uvalde. Rosa picked up the papers. Her hands were steady for a moment, then they were not. She pressed her fist against her mouth the same way my father used to, when something moved him more than he wanted to show. She looked up at the photograph on the wall. My dad and me at the ranch gate the summer we finished the car, both of us grinning, both of us covered in grease. He would have loved this, she said. He told me to, I said. A long time ago, I should have done it sooner. She stood and offered me her hand across the desk. I took it. The grip was firm and steady, the handshake of someone who had earned her place not by blood or luck, but by 26 years of showing up, day after day, and doing exactly what she said she would do. The Mustang is still in the barn. I stood in front of it for a long time after everything was settled, keys in my hand, thinking about the collector in Houston that Craig had already contacted. Thinking about what that money could do. Thinking about whether my father would have wanted the car to be out in the world or sitting behind a locked barn door. Then I remembered the last time we sat in it together, engine idling, bay doors open, the cedar smell coming in from the hill. He said, some things don't have a price. The moment you put one on them, they stop being what they were. I put the keys back on the hook. The hill country is going quiet now as winter comes in. The cedar is turning rust-colored and the mornings smell cold and clean, the way they have always smelled on this property. The smell I grew up with, the smell I almost lost. Rosa is in the barn by 6 every morning. I'm up before she is. My speech is fully back. I use the cane only on the uneven ground in the south pasture, where the terrain drops away toward the creek. I walk out there in the evenings sometimes, the same way my father did, and I think about the 41 years it took me to understand something he had always known. That the people who stay are not always the ones who share your name. That loyalty is not inherited. It is built slowly, in ordinary and unwitnessed acts, until it becomes something that can hold weight when everything else has given out. Craig is somewhere in Austin. The divorce is proceeding exactly as you would expect it to, given the wire transfers and the forensic accounting. Amber is in Scottsdale. Neither of them will ever set foot on this property again. I adjusted my father's photograph on the office wall this morning. I have started sleeping a full night. The monitors are gone. The house sounds the way it is supposed to sound. The ranch is mine, fully, legally, and permanently. And the car is in the barn, exactly where my father left it, smelling like motor oil and worn leather, and every Saturday morning we ever spent together, and that is worth more than any number that collector in Houston could have put on it. If you've made it this far, if you know what it is to fight for your own life with the very people who were supposed to protect it, then hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you finally stopped hoping they would change and started protecting yourself instead? I read every single one.